Hello students, this is Matthew sir again. The rise of nationalism in Europe, that is what is a chapter we have already started. We have finished up the first part of it. Just doing the revision of whatever we have done previously. We started with Frederick Sorai's four prints. Okay. Followed by that we did the concept of nation states. I am not going into detail, already you have my lecture. I am just revising it. We have learned the Ernest Renan's philosophy about a nation. Then we went down and we try to understand that how French Revolution influenced the people of Europe. Okay, with their different ideas of flag and of their ideas like La Patrie and La Citoyenne. Okay, then we did how did the French Revolution influence the people of Europe. What was the major change that occurred in the political and constitutional scenario due to French Revolution in Europe? That was the next point. Followed by that, we learned about the Napoleonic Civil Code. Napoleonic Civil Code, we have done it in detail. How did the local people in the areas conquered by Napoleon reacted to the French people? These are some of the topics which we have already done. And I hope that you might have also completed the homework which was given to you. The question and answers of the homeworks which you should do is compulsory. You have to go through the textbooks. You have seen that textbook is already vast and there are a lot of points in that. I am trying to make it as easy as possible with this question and answer technique. So what you have to do is you have to refer the textbook again and again, because we are not learning here in the traditional way of reading from the textbook and giving the explaining you something, because ultimately it will not solve the purpose of learning the question and answers. So we are learning the entire textbook. We are learning each and every word and point of the textbook, but in a different manner which you might have understood it. Now let us see the answers of the homework which I had given to you. What was the mission of French Revolution? That was a question which I have asked to you, and the answer for that is the mission for French Revolution was to liberate the people of Europe from despotism and help them to become nations. We already know what is despotism is. It is nothing but a monarchy, or the monarchy which existed in France. Okay, the despotic rules of the king. That is what all the other places in Europe they were also facing. So French Revolution was basically to liberate the people out of this despotism and help them to become the nations. Holland. Okay, now let me go to the back. Okay, second question was in 1790 French armies moved to which countries? The answer here is the French armies moved to Holland, Belgium, Switzerland and Italy. Okay, let us go down to the next question. How did the revolutionary ideas spread to other countries? Okay, the answer here is when the news of French Revolution reached the different cities of Europe, then the students and the other members of the educated middle class in their country, they began setting up Jacobins Club. Okay, we already know that Jacobins Club was something which was considered to be as a symbol of freedom. So thus the revolutionary ideas as they spread in different parts of Europe. Okay, now let us go down to the next question. In which countries, define plebiscite? The answer for that is a plebiscite is a direct vote by which all the people of the region are asked to accept or reject the proposal. Okay, it's a kind of direct vote. There can be a question asked by the government, and based on that the people have to give their response. That is what is called as plebiscite. One such plebiscite was also conducted in India when the French people wanted to leave our country after we got freedom. The French people asked the territories in India, okay, they conducted a plebiscite and when they conducted a plebiscite in Chandranagar, the people of Chandranagar voted in the favor of India, that they wanted to join to India, and that is how plebiscites are conducted. So they are direct vote. They are nothing but then this voting is not for political purpose, but then it is basically done for getting the answers for some queries. Now let us go down to the next question. In which countries the French army was welcomed as the harbingers of liberty? Answer here is Holland, Switzerland, okay, and then we have got Switzerland and cities like Brussels, Mainz, Milan, and Warsaw. These are some of the cities. So two major countries, Holland and Switzerland. But yes, of course, you can write Brussels, Mainz, Milan, and Warsaw also. Okay. Then the previous question was that how were the French armies welcomed? The French armies was welcomed as the harbingers of liberty, the one who will come down to give us the liberty. Okay, they are considered as angels. They will come down and then they will give us liberty. So these are the answers basically for the questions asked. I will not give you answers again and again, because since you have to go to the textbook, you have to refer to the textbook, and whatever topic which is given to you, which is taught to you properly, the answers are based on that. So when the lecture is going on, you have to pay attention to it, hear it 2 or 3 times at least, and then I suppose that the questions, if you try to answer, it will become very, very easy for you. Now let us move on today to the topic. Today we are going to talk about the political conditions of the Europe in the 18th century. Now let us see the political condition of Europe during the 18th century, what it is. This is basically the second topic which we are going to take. First we have already finished. Now on the right hand side you are seeing a map. Okay, we already know that when you see a map, there are so much of small names which is being given. You may have to zoom in and you have to see it, but if you see, there are so small names which have been given there. Now what does it mean? It means that there were small kingdoms there. Okay, if you see the bigger countries now which exist, like Germany, Italy, and Switzerland. Okay, today we have got Germany, today we have got Italy, today we have got Switzerland. But yesteryears, in your past or in the olden days, it was not these countries. These all countries were divided into small kingdoms, into duchies, into cantons. Okay, where the rulers were autonomous territories. Autonomous means they were having their own rules. Now duchies, cantons, kingdoms, they are nothing but an autonomous territory. In their own territory, they are the rulers there. Okay, there is no one specific king who is ruling all this territory. So that is how this entire countries today which exist as Germany, Italy, and Switzerland, they were existing into divided kingdoms, duchies, and cantons. Okay, what is meant by duchies, what is meant by cantons? They are nothing but a separate rule, okay, of a territory, an autonomous territory which will be held by a noble or a ruler or a small king, what you call it. Okay, Eastern and Central Europe was under the monarchies. You can see a lot of Eastern and Central Europe were under the autocratic monarchies, and within their territories there were a lot of diverse type of people living. Now what do you mean by diverse? Is people spoke different languages and they belong to different ethnic groups. Now when we talk of different ethnic groups, that means these people, there were a lot of migrants also. You understand that they were from different places, but they were staying in this area, and their language was different, their tradition was different, but they were living in this particular area. So we call them as ethnic. Any Indian who goes and stays in America will be called as an ethnic there in America. So these ethnic people, languages, they belong to different languages, they belong to different ethnic groups, and they did not saw themselves as sharing of collective identity or common culture. That means they never got united together, on the basis of their identity or their common culture. They were just under one. They were just under these rules, okay, which was also divided. This monarchical rule which was there, which existed as canton and duchess. People were living in that without any, having a common identity or common culture. Different types of people, different language speaking people, people belonging to different ethnic groups. So students, the people were living in different areas, as I have already told you, and they were, though they were living under one king, they did not have anything in them common, but still these people were continuously living together. So Europe was not in a better condition in the 18th century. You can see different types of people living under the autocratic monarchies. So they might be somewhere, internally they might be feeling that they should get freedom from all these problems. Okay, now let us move on to the next. In which countries does the Habsburg Empire ruled over? Now, what is a Habsburg Empire? This is a name which has been given to an empire which ruled over the Austria-Hungary. Now, when you talk about Austria and Hungary, okay, that Austria-Hungary Empire, the Austrian and Hungary, the empire which ruled over Austria and Hungary, this is basically called as Habsburg Empire. So in which country is Habsburg Empire ruled over? The answer will be it ruled over the patchwork of different regions and different people. Just now we talked about the same way the entire Europe, when we talked about 18th century, was living in a different regions where the people were living under one empire. That is what we were talking about. And yes, this is one example here, the Habsburg Empire. Okay, the Habsburg Empire ruled over the Austria-Hungary area, okay, which was a patchwork of different regions and different peoples. Now the next question will be, you can see a map which has been given here, and you can see Austria-Hungary empire, which I have already highlighted, where you can see the Czech Republic, you can see Austria also there, and you can see Hungary also there. So together it was called, you can see the border, the red border indicates the Habsburg Empire. Okay, Habsburg Empire was a patchwork of different regions. Just now I told why, then the justification is there why it is called as a patchwork of different regions and people. Now let us see the regions which are included under the Habsburg Empire. The region which is included in the Habsburg Empire is the Alpine region. Okay, the Alpine region consists of Tyrol. You can see the green, and you can see the green color, and you can see the yellowish color area here, that is called as the Tyrol. Okay, now that is one area which was ruled. Then followed by that, Austria is there. Then we have got the Sudetenland, and we also have got Bohemia. Okay, now Sudetenland and Bohemia together we will call it as Czechoslovakia. Okay, so now it is called as Czechoslovakia, but then during that time it was not called as Czechoslovakia. It was just called as Sudetenland and Bohemia differently. Okay, Tyrol is nothing but a place which is Western Austria that time. Okay, so Western Austria, we can see in the west part of Austria it is there. So Western Austria was Tyrol, and then we have got the Alpine, that was Alpine region also, and Sudetenland and Bohemia, Czechoslovakia. So this was the area which was included in the Habsburg Empire. But it does not mean that only this much area. There was a vast area. It was a very big area. So we have got some Italian-speaking provinces, of Lombardy and Venetia. That was also under the Habsburg Empire. So you can see now different language people. Now you can see Sudetenland, Bohemia, that means Czechoslovakia. These people have got a different tradition and different types of language. So they are also under this Austrian-Hungarian Empire, that is the Habsburg Empire. Then we have got the Italian-speaking provinces of Lombardy and Venetia. Then we have got in Hungary half of the population which was speaking Magyar. Now Magyar is the Hungarian language, okay, but half of the people were speaking Hungarian language, but half of the people in Hungary itself, they were speaking different other types of languages, different other dialects. Dialects are, maybe the language may be similar, but then they have a variation in their language, so that is called as dialects. Then you got Galicia, which is now it is called as Spain. So there in this Galicia, the aristocracy are the people, aristocrats are the people who are very rich people, the top grade people who are living in that particular area. They spoke Polish language. So generally the Galicia people should speak the Galician language, the Spanish language, but the aristocracy, the rich people in that area, they used to speak the Polish language. There were other communities also, like we already talked, Bohemians were there, the Slovaks were there, the Slovenes were there, the Croats were there. Croats means the Croatia, that is a country. Then you got the Romans there. So you got different types of communities living under one empire. Okay. The only tie binding this diverse group together was the common allegiance to the emperor. Allegiance means the attachment to the emperor. So that was the only thing common. They all had one king. They all belonged to one emperor. They all belonged to one empire. Otherwise, there was nothing common in these people. Their language was different, and when you call about language is different, maybe their traditions, maybe their culture, they all differ. But still these people, they were living under one king. Okay. So over a period of time, these people will ask for freedom. Okay. And that was the reason, why we studied the nation states. So this is how we are slowly moving down to, how this different nation states were formed, or how the unification of various places took place. So this is a start. Try to understand this. So today what we have done is we have tried to understand the Austrian and Hungarian empire, which we call is a Habsburg empire, and we have seen what is it made up of. You can see on the map, you will see Bohemia, you will see Slovakia, you will see you will see the what do you call Serbia, Bosnia, Croatia, Slovenia. Everything can be seen on the screen itself. So that is something which is a ready-made visual impact for you on this particular screen. Let us move on to the next point. Explain the features of aristocracy class. Just now we talked about the aristocracy class, right? These aristocracies, the landed aristocracies, the one which has lands, they were called as the nobles. Aristocracies are the nobles. You can see right side how the attire of these people are, how they look. They'll try to be different from the normal people. They were socially and political dominant class. The members of this class, they were united among themselves. Their way of lying, their way of life, that was cutting across their regional differences. Though they lived in different regions, okay, they might be living in different regions, but their way of life was similar, lavish, enjoying, okay. Their families were connected. How? By the marriage ties between them. Like today also we have got all rich people, they getting married to themselves. You might have seen how the Ambanis, they got, the daughter of the Ambani got married to the Piramals. They both are business tycoons. That means the aristocracies, they try to keep their ties together. Okay, powerful aristocracies. Numerically, they were very small in number, but they were very powerful. Though they were small in number, but still they controlled a big area, since they were aristocrats and they were holding huge lands. They were having money. They were having that power, political power. Socially also they were respected. So these all things. This goes to explain the features of the aristocracy class. So I hope you are understanding it. We are seeing different features now. Okay, when we are talked about the Austrian Habsburg Empire, now we are talking about the different types of people. That is the aristocrats, and then later on we'll talk about the peasants, the poor people, and you'll see about the commercial class which is coming up. So all these things we're talking about the features of that. I hope you're understanding it. You're seeing the picture, you're seeing the notes. This is what, and this is the questions are there in front of you. So please learn this. Please make a note of this. Write it down. Okay, learn these all things. Okay. Let us move on to the next slide now. Okay, student, the next slide asks us a question that explains the features of the peasants group. On the right hand side, you are seeing the conditions of the peasants. How poor, how weak they are, and they are doing their job. So majority of the people, population, or the majority of the population was peasants in those days. And when we talk about the peasants, let us see the location where they were present. We can see on the western side, on the Western Europe. Okay, we can see on the Western Europe, bulk of land was farmed by tenants. Tenants are the one who don't own any land, but they will be working on that particular land. And there were small owners. That means they were having small pieces of land. So here you can see The west of Europe, to the west of the Europe, the bulk of the land was formed by tenants and small owners, while the eastern and the central part of the Europe, you will see vast estates of lands. Of course, they belong to the nobles, and they were cultivated by the serfs. Serfs are nothing but the bonded laborers who worked for the aristocracies or for the nobles. So that is the conditions, or that is the features of the peasant groups which was available during that 18th century, where what about what we are talking about. Okay, so I hope that the features of peasants are also very clear. Okay, bulk of land in the western Europe, which was formed by tenants and small owners, and east and central vast lands cultivated by the serfs. Now let us move on to the next slide. Which new class emerged after the industrialization in Europe? Understand the question properly. Which is the new class which emerged after the industrialization in Europe? Before that, you got only two classes here, either peasants or aristocracies. Okay, now let us see different classes which come up after industrialization. The western part, okay, if you see the western part of the Europe, basically there, western part as well as some central part, okay, both the places you will saw a lot of growth in the industrial production and trade. Okay, and there a new class started growing up which we called as, and that class grew in the town. Okay, and so this class which grew in the town, this class was called as a CC, that is the commercial class. We call it as what? Commercial class. So the growth of the town and the emergence of commercial class. Okay, both these things was as a result of the industrial production and trade. That means what? The existence of this class and the existence of the town, it depended upon the production of the market, production for the market. Okay, now let us see which were the countries who were at the forefront of these industries. Initially, we all know that industrialization began in England, and in the second half of the 18th century, okay, that it started. But in France and the parts of Germany, it started during the early 19th century. Okay, so there this was the starting of industrialization in Europe. We already see that in central part and western part started. Western part is because it started in England, and then later on France and Germany, that means the central part. But it started a little later. Okay, then which are the classes which came into existence? We got new social groups which are coming. One is the working class. Okay, the working class population which was there, which called as the middle class. Also the middle class which was made up of industrialists, businessmen, professionals, all those were included in the middle class. So that is what we are right. We have talked about the countries, we have talked about the working class, we talked about the middle class. Okay, so you can see right inside, you can see which are the pictures of the workers who are working. We can see the picture of even women workers there. Okay, who are the forefront during the industrialization. Okay, so now let us move on to the next part. Next slide. That is, what was the effect of the rise of new class in Europe? Now, the new class in Europe was educated, was a liberal middle class, and this educated and liberal middle class, this they got they have an idea of national unity, and they also have an idea that we should abolish of the aristocracies, or the abolishment of aristocratic privileges. Okay, these two things, it started gaining popularity, and that was the effect of the new class coming up in Europe. They never favored, this new class never favored the aristocracies and the privileges they were enjoying. Okay, and a bulk of people been suffering when this few amount of people were gaining all this. So liberal educated middle class, which we call them, okay, who talked about the national unity and talked about the abolition of aristocratic privileges. So let us move on to the next slide. You can see right side, you can see the pictures also of the liberal middle class. There is a rise of new class in Europe. What does liberal nationalism stands for? This is a very interesting point. Liberal nationalism, what does it stand for? Liberal nationalism stands for, liberal nationalism is also called as liberalism. It stood for freedom for the individual and equality of all before the law. Okay, it means what? It means freedom for the individual and equality before law. EBL, we call it as EBL, equality before law. The term liberalization comes from the Latin word called as liber, which means free. Politically, it emphasizes on the concept of government, because today in India also we have a government. So we have got democracy, we have got freedom, we have got liberalism, right? Then the next point is French Revolution was the one where liberalism actually started, and it stood for the end of the autocracy, that is monarchy, and the clerical privileges which were given to the nobles. A constitution. Okay, at the end of French Revolution, we saw that a constitution and a representative government through parliament was elected. So that is how the liberalism stood for. That is for how the liberalism stood during the French Revolution. So since French Revolution, liberalism stood for the end of autocracy and the end of all the clerical privileges. Okay, it meant a constitution and a representative government through the parliament. 19th century, there was an idea of national unity. Okay, 19th century, if you see, the liberals, they stressed on the idea of one thing was national unity, and second thing, these liberals also stressed on the inviolability of the private property. Now, inviolability means infringement. Infringement means you should not allow the private property. One should stop, one should ban the private property. So the liberals stressed on this. Try to understand the features, okay, of liberalism. You have to understand the features of liberalism, that it means what? Here there should be a government, there should be a representative government through parliament. It should mean freedom to the people. It should give it should bring the idea of nationalism or national unity among the people. At the same time, liberals also stressed on the infringement or the banning of the private property. So I hope you understood liberal nationalism properly. We will also see some video towards the end. Okay, if possible, the time permits. Now students, let us go to the next slide called as equality before law does not stand for universal adult suffrage. We already know what is universal adult suffrage, right side you can see a picture. It means voting. Okay, in France after revolution, right to vote. Okay, in France after the revolution, the right to vote was not only given to it was only given to the men who owned properties. Okay, who had properties. So property owing to the men, they only got the right to vote. Okay, so and they also had the property. They also have one more benefit, that they can get elected. So can we call it as a true democracy, or can we call it as a universal adult suffrage? Of course, no. Okay, so there was some type of biasness here, but that was the method which was used after the French Revolution also. So equality before law, can we call it an equality before law? We cannot call it an equality before law, because after the revolution, everybody should have got the right to vote, but only the right to vote was given to the people who own the property. Okay, the men without property and all the women were excluded from the political right. Now, during the brief period of Jacobins, you have seen the revolutionary Jacobins, when they ruled France, okay, for some time in between, before Napoleon Bonaparte, we can see that all adult male enjoyed the suffrage for a brief period. That means till the Jacobins were ruling. The women did not got that time also the right. During the Napoleonic Code, when Napoleon came down, he brought his own code, and he brought back to the limited suffrage, and he reduced the woman to the status of minor. That means they were under the authority of the father and the husband. So Napoleonic Code brought back the limitations to the adult suffrage. We can't call it as equality before law. It doesn't justify that. In the 19th and the early 20th century, there are lots and lots of movements. Okay, the women movements were also there, which started demanding equal political rights. EPR is equal political right. So a lot of movements were conducted during that time by the women and non-propertied men, those who don't have properties, since they were not allowed to vote. So they started demonstrating. They started coming down to the roads. You can see there right side a lot of movements which have been carried out. All these people, they came together and they fought for their political rights, because today we are the citizen of any country. That means we have got the right to vote, and that is our basic right. Okay, so let us go on to the next slide. Explain any four ideas of liberalism. Okay, uh, now we have already seen what is liberalism means. When we talk about liberalism, it meant actually freedom. But then freedom, first time you can see it was seen as a method which is called as which existed in the 29 states. Okay, so the question here is what is the uh, explain any ideas of liberal nationalism in economic sphere. Okay, we already know what is liberalism means. Okay, it stood basically for the freedom of the individual, and we have talked about that it is equality before law. Now, liberalism here also stood for the freedom of market and the abolition of the state imposed restriction. Okay, what I told, liberalism stood for freedom of market and abolition of state imposed restrictions. That is, during the rule of Napoleon, the administration of there was a confederation. During Napoleon's administration, there was a confederation. There is a group of 29 states. Each of these possesses its own currencies. Each of them possesses its own weights and measures. Such conditions were viewed as an obstacle. This was considered to be as an obstacle to the economic exchange. So what happened is, this liberal nationalist, this LN stands for liberal nationalist, argued the creation of this unified economic territory, allowing the hindrance of the movement. So the liberal nationalists, they got all unified together. They told that yes, we are going to fight against all these things. How can you have different types of currencies, different types of weights and measures? So we are going to fight. So they started a movement for that, for having a to have the unhindered movement of these goods, peoples and capitals. So the liberal nationalists argued this creation of unified economic territory and allowing the unhindered movement of the goods, people and the capital. In 1834, a custom union called as Zollverein was formed, and this union abolished all the tariff barriers and reduced the number of currencies from 30 to just 2. The creation of network of railway was also stimulated. That also stimulated uh, it stimulated the process of it actually stimulated the mobility. Okay, it also stimulated the national unification. Economic interest also stimulated, as well as the national unification, I already told. So all these things were the benefits of Zollverein actually. Okay, but why Zollverein took place? Zollverein took place because there were 29 states under Napoleon's administration, all having different currencies, weights and measures. So there was a need which was felt that people should come together. People should they should come together, as well as they should unite together, and then they should oppose all this, and then abolish these tariff barriers, and bring the currencies from 330 to 2. Okay, the other benefits were the network of railway was also stimulated, the mobility, economic interest also got stimulated, national unification also started taking place. Right side you can see Zollverein, the customs union which eliminated the trade barriers. Okay, and you can later on you can see the areas also which were 29 states which are under the Napoleon. Okay, so let us move on to the next. This is a video basically. So we will play this video. Okay students, now let us see the video of liberalization. I will play it for you.
Liberalism is a political philosophy or worldview based and founded on ideas of liberty and equality, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, free markets, civil rights, democratic societies, secular governments, gender equality, and international cooperation are all ideas that liberalism stands for. So, liberals opposed traditional conservatism and sought to replace absolutism in government with representative democracy and the rule of law. During the Age of Enlightenment, liberalism became popular among philosophers and economists in the Western world, which is when it first became a distinct political movement. Liberalism rejected the prevailing social and political norms of hereditary privilege, state religion, absolute monarchy, and the divine rights of kings. John Locke, 17th century philosopher, is often credited as a founder of liberalism as a distinct philosophical tradition. He argued that each man has a natural right to life, liberty, and property, which are the rights that government must not violate based on the social contract. Leaders in the Glorious Revolution, the American Revolution, and the French Revolution used the liberal philosophy to overthrow royal tyranny. However, only after French Revolution, liberalism started to significantly spread, and it was only in 19th century when liberal governments started to establish in nations across Europe and South America. Before 1920, the main ideological opponent of classical liberalism was conservatism, but liberalism then faced major ideological challenges from new opponents, fascism and communism. World liberalism and all its forms, or similar terms like liberal, liberty, and so on, originate from Latin liber, which is free. One of the first recorded instances of the word liberal occurs in 1375. It was used to describe the liberal arts in the context of an education desirable for a freeborn man. With the rise of the Enlightenment, the word acquired decisively more positive undertones, being defined as free from narrow prejudice and free from bigotry. In English, the first use of the word liberalism appeared in 1815. By the middle of 19th century, liberal was used as a political term for parties and movements worldwide. Liberalism is a synonym for freedom.
Okay students, now let us move down to the next slide, that is the homework slide. What is installed for you this time for homework is few questions which you have to get it from your textbook. What was the major change that occurred in the political and constitutional scenario due to the French Revolution in Europe? That's the first question. What was the aim of the French Revolution? Which was the measuring unit of cloth in Germany? Explain the Zollverein. Okay, the measuring unit of cloth in Germany, this answer you will get near Zollverein paragraph. Beside this, you have to also remember that the important dates which are given in the blue box, you have to learn them. You have to make a note of all the things which has been shown in the slides. See 2 or 3 times at least and try to understand the concept. If you have any queries, you can write in the comment box. If you like the video, you have to tell that you have liked it, so that I can keep making such videos for you. I hope that you have understood that today's point clearly. Okay, liberalism is very important because henceforward we will be talking on liberalism, because that is the one factor which will make nation states, and we will be learning about the formation of nation states and the unification of few of the countries. So till then, best of luck for you. Do your studies, stay home and be safe. Okay, thank you very much.